Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is a pilot and flight instructor by trade, and he is the author of, among other works, a pair of series of novels, the White Hawk Aviation Adventure series and the Murder by Munchausen Sci-Fi Police Techno-Thrillers. His name is M.T. Bass, and my interview with M.T. will follow the note-taking sound. M.T. Bass, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here tonight.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Okay, well, I'm a novelist. I've written, I think, 14 different books up on Amazon, a couple of different series, one about a pilot, doing different aviation adventures, a sci-fi serial killer, robot mystery series, and then a couple of standalone novels.
There's 3 novels in your White Hawk Aviation Adventure series. Without spoiling too much of the novels in that series, what are each of the books in that series called, and what are each of them about?
Okay, there are 3 novels. The first one is called My Brother's Keeper, and as I said, it follows Hawk is the main character. He's a pilot. He was a P-51 Mustang pilot in World War II. The first book takes place in 1950 after the war, and he's a movie stunt pilot. And during this time, his brother is murdered, and he takes it upon himself to solve the crime because the police want to kind of write it off as a suicide. So that's that adventure there. And it sets up some of the recurring characters. Sparks is his mechanic. And then Elaine was a former girlfriend that he had gone out with there in that book. The second one picks up, it's called Jungle Land, and it is set in the early 60s during the Civil War in Congo. And he is, in that case, a mercenary pilot flying T-6s in the Civil War. And in this one, he becomes involved with a doctor, Ella, and he, as he's fighting the war, so it's kind of a dual thing. He's got the flying and fighting, and then he's got the romantic adventure with Ella there. And Sparks is there taking care of his fighter, and Father Bob is introduced as another character who comes on in the third book, Racing the Dream. And in that one, that's a little bit later in the 60s, 1963, 64. And in this one, he's become an air racer in Formula One aircraft. And at that time, the racing scene had completely disappeared off the face of the earth. It was huge in Cleveland before the war and after the war. And then over the 50s, it just kind of dissipated out until it was kind of moribund. And this follows him as he gets involved with the recurrence of Formula One racing, and it leads to the inaugural Reno air races, which was in 1964. And then from there, that ran for 60 years. So it was really with the resurgence of the air racing that the story is. And with this one, he's racing at different courses, and then he's connecting with a wing walker, Allison. And again, Sparks is there, and Father Bob is there. He's an engineer now designing his airplanes.
You've written 4 novels in the Murder by Munchausen, a sci-fi police techno-thriller series. Without spoiling too much of the novels in that series, what are each of the books in that series called, and what are each of them about?
Okay, this is basically in the near future, 2040, 2050, so not too, well, even closer now. When robots like, the Tesla Optimus are even more human-like, they've, got skin and they're pretty indistinguishable from humans. And in this series, the the robots are hacked and then turned into hitmen for profit. And these books follow the police that track down the hackers and then the robots in causing the crimes. The first three books are pretty well interlinked. Murder by Munchausen sets everything up. It's narrated by Jake. He's one of the detectives on the squad, and him and his partner EC are tracking down this apparently rogue robot that was used to murder a woman's husband. But then it evolves in book 2, which is narrated by his former girlfriend, and she's another detective that gets assigned with him to start investigating more of a series of crimes that starts to look like a reenactment of serial killers through the robots. And then The Invisible Mind concludes that 3-part series, by bringing everything together to solve the final mystery of who the hacker is and bringing that crime to an end. The 4th one is a spin-off. It's called Motherless Children, and that follows, again, some of the robots being used to recreate serial killers, but concentrating a little bit more on, the motherless children aspect of some of the orphans that get involved with that.
Without spoiling too much of the other books that you've written, because you've written a few other books outside of those 2 series, what are those books about?
First one is Something for Nothing, and that's an adventure, treasure hunt adventure series based in Alaska during the building of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. It involves 2 main characters, Waxy and Albert. They were freshman dropouts from Ohio State. They decide to go up there to get rich working on the pipeline. But things don't necessarily work out that well, and they end up working at a bar and get involved with Beantown Bob and Jimmy, the pilot. And eventually they discover that an Air Force plane in the early 50s crashed into a glacier with a load of gold on board. So what happens is they come to a kind of a misunderstanding or an agreement to go after it, but there's a lot of a conflict there between all of the characters. And so the story involves them, going after the gold and getting it, or trying to get it out of the glacier. In the Black is it's a satire of the 60s, and it's my version of Catch-22. That's my favorite book. So, and that's a black comedy. So this is kind of a black comedy in the same vein, and it follows a guy who's graduating high school, going to college at Berkeley, and follows him through the different episodes in the early 60s, and leads up to basically the end of the 60s when they land on the moon, and follows those adventures. Let's see. And there's Crossroads. That's actually a book with its own soundtrack. It's about a rock and roll a band in Cleveland, Ohio, and one of the members in his other job gets mistaken for being involved in espionage in that way. And so as he's trying to get out from under that, there's like 28 different songs from the 70s that are wrapped up into the story and unfold as it goes along. So I call it the first novel with its own soundtrack.
What motivates you to write?
I don't know. I've always done it. I went to school, college for creative writing, but I was doing that mostly to improve lyric writing, because I'm a guitar player and I wanted to write songs. So that's where my focus was there. And then after that, then I just started piling up words, writing novels as part of it. And so I come up with different ideas here and there, a different scene, a different character, and that inspires me to, kind of come up with a story to go with it.
How do you come up with the ideas for your novels and stories in your other books?
Well, Murder by Munchausen, that came to me as a scene, the opening scene in the first book of the two detectives tracking down an errant robot within a warehouse, an abandoned warehouse. So that just came that scene there. Something for Nothing was I just had this story of these two guys dropping out and heading to Alaska to get rich, and then they kind of evolved out of there. Sometimes it's a character. I have a short novella that's a romance book, and that's actually based on a character that my girlfriend Lola knew. She was like 100 years old, and she read, every book on the New York Times bestseller list, and she was reading the biography of Keith Richards at 100 years old. So just the story of that just kind of like crystallized that story in lodging. So it's just ideas crop up, and some of them I set aside, and some of them are interesting, and I kind of pursue them.
How do you create and develop your characters for your novels? And are some of the characters in your novels based on real life people?
There's always a little bit of real people scattered in and among, your own characters, but really I just try to develop them, on their own. One of the interesting things is when I was writing In the Black, the Catch-22 novel, it's a lot like Catch-22. There's a lot of characters, a lot of things going on, and I got about halfway through, and I figured I'm going to have to map this out so that I outline it and make sure I know what's going to happen. So I spent a whole lot of time coming up with a spreadsheet outline for the thing, and I thought I had it all figured out. And when I started writing it, it's like none of the characters wanted to do what I wanted them to do. So they all had kind of a life of their own. So they, I gave up the outline and just let them kind of develop into their own characters.
Do you try to be original in your writing? Do you try to deliver to readers what they want, or do you try to strike a balance between the two? And if it's the latter of those three, how do you try to strike a balance?
Well, I'm not really a genre writer where I'm, working tropes, to fit certain genres. And many people do that, and that's great. I just kind of, as you can tell, I kind of bounce between sci-fi, aviation, black humor. So I guess I'm, more or less trying to find my own path to tell the stories.
Are all of your books independently, traditionally, or hybrid published, or did you use different publishing methods for each of your books?
I published all of the ebooks are available on Kindle or on Amazon. They're all in Kindle Unlimited. I had them spread out before, but I've kind of concentrated on the Kindle Unlimited model for that, and I've uploaded them to that directly. For the printed books, I print them myself through Ingram Spark, so they're all carried in their catalog and available there. So they're pretty much independently published by myself.
Some of your books, if I understand correctly, are available in audiobook format. What is it like for your books to be produced as an audiobook?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I got involved with Findaway Voices, and I started with the Murder by Munchausen series, and they connected me after a number of different candidates with a really good Jason, who's a really good narrator, and then we worked together. And then it was, I would send him the books. He would send me back the MP3s, and I would read it chapter by chapter. And I thought it turned out good. I thought he did a great job.
What is the best advice and the worst advice you've ever received about writing and or publishing?
Well, the first thing, the best advice is you just have to persevere. You just have to keep at it, and that's kind of my motto. You know, persevere to the point of stupidity. Just keep writing books, keep publishing them, keep moving forward and marketing them, and like that. And that's whatever you're doing, you got to do that. It's just persevere what you love to do and what you want to pursue there. The worst advice was, I know it works for some people, but like I said, I tried it before, is outlining my work. Uh, there's somebody, I can't remember the writer, but there was a mystery writer who said, well, I write the story to find out who did it, So, and that's the way I work. I can't, I've tried outlining it. It doesn't work. So I just kind of like move into it. So the folks who say that you've got to, be an outliner and lay everything out, for me, that's not a viable option.
You are a pilot and flight instructor in real life. What is it like to be a pilot and a flight instructor?
It's just fantastic. It's amazing. Because you get your license, you're all ready to go, and you can jump in an airplane, and anywhere in the United States, you can just go wherever you want to go and have a great time. So, just to be able to have that freedom and that is an amazing privilege to have in this country. Being a flight instructor, that was it's sometimes it's boring, sometimes it's terrifying, but it's a lot of fun, teaching somebody how to actually fly.
One last question. You're also a musician. What genres of music do you perform?
Mostly rock music. I do some country, a lot of blues. So play guitar and a little bit of keyboards. So uh, that's mostly what I do. Lately I've been just doing acoustic gigs. Playing those kind of songs acoustically for folks because it's just a lot of fun and it's low stress.
I actually have one more question before I end this interview, and I'm going to mention to our listeners this is an audio only podcast, so the photo in question will not be visible to our listeners. But the photo for you on Zoom is a photo of you using a typewriter while wearing a hard hat and appearing to be taking a break from doing chainsaw work. What is the make and model of the typewriter?
That's a Royal typewriter. I believe it's dates from about 1943, and it's got tombstone keys on it. A little background on the photos. I was working with a fellow, with a local bookshop, and he agreed to let me take pictures for something for nothing. And I realized that when you look at authors' photos, they're all pretty much just headshots. There's no writers in action kind of thing. So I went to an antique mall, found that typewriter, and then every month I've been taking pictures with myself in different settings, and I've been doing it for 9.5 years now, with just different pictures. That photo that you're talking about, that was actually it was called Pulp Fiction, because obviously I'm cutting down trees, so that was the name of that photo there. So,
MT, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. It was amazing to interview you.
yeah, it's a lot of fun talking to you. I had a great time.
As I mentioned in the outro to the previous episode, a major change to how I produce interview episodes for this podcast is coming. I'll note that the following changes will take effect for the next episode of this podcast, and I'll also note that the changes involve the intro and outro segments of interview episodes. Starting with the next interview episode I upload, the vast majority of episodes will not have an intro or outro segment preceding or following the interview. If an intro and or outro segment is needed for a particular episode, any intro segment will precede the opening theme, and any outro segment will follow the closing theme. The note-taking sounds that have preceded and followed the interviews will no longer be a regular feature of this podcast, and they will only be used for interview episodes if an outro segment is needed for an interview episode in order to separate the outro and the disclaimer. I'm doing these changes for a couple of reasons. First, I've had dental problems for some time now, and I need to save as much of the personal energy I devote to this podcast as possible for the interviews themselves. Second, the changes will allow me to upload podcast episodes more frequently and help clear a massive backlog of episodes I need to get uploaded as quickly as possible. Furthermore, the remaining episodes of Season 9 will be uploaded throughout April, May, and June, with the Season 10 premiere coming sometime around the first third of July. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.